Today, we will be learning about one-sided limits. Let's start off by looking at this right here. What this means is as x approaches 3 from the left side, which is what this negative sign means, this doesn't mean that 3 is negative. We're just looking at values of x where it approaches 3, where the value of x is less than 3. So numbers that are right here. We're looking at this side. And so we ask ourselves, as x approaches 3 from the left side, then what is g of x? This is basically what we need to ask ourselves when we see the limit of g of x as x approaches 3 from the left side. And we can see that as x approaches 3 from this direction right here from the left side, then g of x approaches 2. And that right there would just be our answer, equals 2. Now let's look at another one-sided limit where we have x approaches 3 from the right side, which is shown by drawing a positive sign. So we're going to be looking at values of x as values of x where it is greater than 3. So that can be 3.01, 3.5, and so on. So we're going to be looking at this direction right here. So we're going to be looking at the right side. We're looking from the right side, and we see that as x approaches 3 from the right side, then g of x approaches 4. Even though it's undefined, g of x still approaches 4. So that is what we're going to write, 4. And so now we're going to take a look at this, the limit of g of x as x approaches 3. And in order to determine if a limit exists, or in order to find this limit, we're going to have to look at our one-sided limits from before. And if they equal each other, then we know that this limit right here exists. But if they do not, then the limit does not exist. And in this case, the limit of g of x as x approaches 3 from the left, and the limit of g of x as x approaches 3 from the right, they do not equal each other. They have different values, and because they have different values, they're not going to equal each other, which means that g of x, this limit right here of g of x as x approaches 3, does not exist. Now moving on, we have the limit of g of x as x approaches negative 2 from the left side. So what we're going to do is look from the left side of the graph as x approaches negative 2, and this consists of values like negative 3, negative 4, negative 2.5, and so on. We're just looking at this side of the graph. And as x approaches negative 2 from the left side of the graph, we see that the function g of x approaches 3, and once again, even though it's undefined, the function g of x still approaches 3 from the left side. So that's what we're going to write, 3. And so now moving on, we have the limit of g of x as x approaches negative 2 from the right side, or the positive side. And so we're going to be looking at this side right here. And we see that as x approaches negative 2 from the right side of the graph, then g of x approaches 5. So we're going to write down 5. And now once again, to determine the limit of g of x as x approaches negative 2, we have to make sure that these two limits equal each other, and then we will be able to write down an answer for here. However, these two limits do not equal each other, which means that the limit of g of x as x approaches negative 2 does not exist. Now let's look at an example when the limit of g of x as x approaches a certain value from both sides does exist. So let's look at the limit of g of x as x approaches 2 from the left hand side. So remember, this doesn't mean negative 2. This just means we're looking at the value of 2 as x approaches 2 from the left side, which would be right here. And so as x approaches 2 from the left side, then g of x seems to be approaching 5. So we're going to write that down. And now let's look at the limit of g of x as x approaches 2 from the right side. Then we're going to be looking at this side of the graph right here. And we see that as x approaches 2 from the right side, then g of x also approaches 5. Or yeah, it approaches 5. So we're going to write that down. And so now to find the limit of g of x as x approaches 2, we're going to be looking at our one-sided limits, and these limits equal each other, which means that and they both equal 5, which means that the limit of g of x as x approaches 2 also equals 5.